there, my name's Caitlin Bandy and this is my channel BandysBooks. Today we're here for a rant or review, and today's video is going to fall somewhere in the middle. So this isn't necessarily a glowingly positive review, but it's also not completely a rant either. I found that this book was kind of a mixed bag, and so we have a lot to talk about. We're going to be talking about Camp Zero by Michelle Min Sterling, and this book came out on the 4th of April. It was published by Atria Books, and it was picked up both by Book of the Month, as you can see, and Jenna's Book Club. This is a climate change dystopian fic, and it is set like 40 or so years in the future, and the world has just been ravaged by climate change. The southern portion of North America is just completely blistering hot, and the only places that are really comfortable are like up in the northern reaches of Canada. We have a society where the average person is struggling to get by, suffering from immense heat waves, droughts, things like that. And we have a handful of privileged elite around the world that live in these like bubble cities, these floating cities. Basically, they're glass spheres that are anchored off of the coastline of different locations and are kept climate controlled to make life a bit more enjoyable. So this story begins as we find several different characters ending up in the northern reaches of Canada. So we have a main character named Rose, who is at Camp Zero under the guise of being a sex worker, but she's also there for a secondary reason, and that's to spy on the architect of Camp Zero and see what he's up to. Then we have Grant, who is a professor who has recently moved to Camp Zero to teach workers there, and he's kind of fleeing a dark family legacy. He comes from one of these floating cities. His family is very privileged, and his surname is well known and notorious, and he's trying to flee this dark legacy and kind of carve out his own path in life. And at Camp Zero, there are legends floating around of an elite group of female soldiers that are living in a Cold War era climate research station. And nobody knows if it's true. There is definitely some talk about them, but most of it remains speculation. All of these stories are going to intertwine, and we're going to find out how the average person is surviving, what the camp architect is up to, and what's going on at Camp Zero. This book is told in multiple POVs. So we have Rose's POV, we have Grant's POV, and then we have these chapters that are titled White Rabbit. I'm not going to go into any detail on those chapters because I don't want to spoil them. And this is a non-linear timeline. So not only are we popping between POVs, but we're also popping between different points in time. There are memories and reflections and things that are interspersed. So it can be a little confusing and disjointed initially, but I felt like as the story progressed, it was easier for me to follow where each thing was set and who was talking at specific points. First, we're going to talk about the positives. So I really appreciated that this book delved into climate change. Climate change is a very real thing. I currently live in a state that's been heavily impacted by drought, and my home state is also super heavily impacted by drought. I think in both states we're looking at like almost 10 years of super severe drought conditions, and the main reservoirs and the main river that supplies water to almost the entirety of the west coast of the United States is drying up at an alarming rate. I'm literally watching it. In the 3 or 4 years that I've been back in Vegas, I have literally seen Lake Mead, which is one of our main reservoirs, just drop. You can literally see different levels of where the water was and where it's at now. And it's like a puddle compared to what it used to be. So I'm seeing the impacts of this firsthand. We've also been seeing record-breaking temperatures every summer. And so this book kind of picks up on those types of trends and just exacerbates them a bit. It makes them just a little more extreme than they are now. So it's kind of like it's a warning. It's saying, you know, this is where we could get if we don't take this seriously and do what, you know, needs to be done at this point. I found it interesting that at several points in the book, they mention that the fossil fuel industry has completely collapsed, that they no longer produce gas, there's no longer any use for fossil fuels. And it's linked to the climate change situation. But they also point out that by the time society was willing to give up their fossil fuels, it was too late, that the climate change was too far gone, and that this was like basically a useless gesture. So yeah, I really liked how this book played with current themes and current things that are happening and just kind of made them a bit more extreme to create this dystopian world. I also appreciated that this book has really positive portrayals of sex workers. 6 of our main characters are sex workers, and we find that out within the first chapter of the book. They have come to Camp Zero to try and better their station in life, and they are doing that by working as high-class sex workers. And the thing that I really like about this is that, yes, that's their job, and we do see some sex work in the book, and they do discuss their sex work. It isn't like their defining trait. And I feel like that's something that people tend to like lean into, is that they always write sex workers a specific way. And this book did not fall into this trap. This book fleshed out the characters. It made each of them unique people with unique goals, unique motivations, unique personalities. It created whole characters and treated sex work just like it would treat any other job. It's their profession. It's not who they are. And so I thought that was a really positive thing. I thought the handling on that specific subject was really well done. I also really appreciated that the majority of focal characters in this story were female. They were all really strong, powerful females. Every single female character that we run into, for the most part, is smart, clever, motivated, loyal. Like, they're just full of good characteristics, and I really enjoyed that portrayal. It's not to say that there weren't any good male characters either. There were definitely some good male characters too, but it was definitely a very female-centered book. And I think you could even make the case that one of the storylines is pretty feminist. Not in a super preachy way, but just in a way that, kind of supports women can do anything that they put their minds to. And I'm here for it. I enjoyed it. That said, there were a handful of things that did not work for me in this book. In particular, when I was researching this book, it was described as electrifying, gripping, exhilarating, things that kind of pertain to excitement, fast-paced. This book is not fast-paced. In my opinion, this book is slow-paced, it's meandering and plotting, it's not an edge of your seat kind of a thriller. You don't feel your heart pounding. I feel like, if anything, it's a slow trickle of information that kind of lazily plods along until we get to some sort of a conclusion. So for me, this was more like a dystopian sci-fi than like a thriller. As I mentioned at the beginning of this review, this story is told in multiple POVs, and I love a good multiple perspective type story. However, in this book, I found two things wrong with this particular style. First of all, we have one POV character whose POV is incredibly boring. Honestly, I could have done without 90% of his story. I think if we had learned about him and what was going on with him through the perspective of another character, it might have actually been more interesting. And then my second issue with the multi-POV situation is that the most interesting storyline for me was the one that got the least page time. It was just interspersed here and there in between the other POVs. And I wanted to read more of that particular story, find out more information about that particular story. We're just given these like little tiny snippets. Now, perhaps this is Michelle Min Sterling teasing us for a book in the future where she writes about that particular storyline. However, I feel like because it was included in this book, I think it should have been fleshed out a little more than it was. One thing that I was both appreciative of and frustrated by was the discussion of colonialism in this book. So Camp Zero is in northern Canada, and it is set on Indigenous land. In fact, they make a point to talk about the Dene Nations and the First Nations tribes. I really love that they discuss that they mention the Indigenous roots of the land, and they mention colonization and like white people coming in and stealing that land. I would have loved to see an Indigenous character pop up in the book, and I would have loved to see their opinion on this particular issue, because not only do we have the original white settlers that came in and stole the land from the First Nations tribes that lived up in this area of Canada, but now we have this hypothetical society that has gone in and used their privilege and their wealth to financially exploit people that are suffering from climate crisis. I feel like this is such an important topic, and there's so much that Sterling could have done with this particular subject. For me, it was such a letdown. It was like exciting when I saw her going into this discussion of land and land rights and Indigenous tribes and how they've been displaced by people with money coming in and stealing their land. But I just wanted it to go so much farther. I really did. And I wanted it to dive into this discussion, and it just kind of skimmed the surface of it. So I guess it's better that it was mentioned than not mentioned, but I wish it wasn't a superficial mention. And then something that I could see being frustrating for a lot of readers is that this book ends very open-endedly. It just kind of cuts off. It's like the writer just got tired of writing and said, oh, okay, we'll stop here. I didn't feel like it concluded in the right place. I am all for a fade to black, let you imagine how it ends kind of an ending. I don't hate that. But I feel like this one is a little too just abruptly fading to black. It's almost as if the author decided to purposefully leave everything open-ended so that she could write a sequel later if the book did well. I don't know that that's going to happen. I think that this is a standalone. That's the impression that I have, and everything that I've read indicates it's a standalone. But nothing is really tied up. Nothing really has a concrete conclusion. Overall, kind of a mixed bag with this book. I really liked the setting. I really liked the characters, and I really liked that there was an attempt at exploring some very difficult and relevant topics. I do wish it had gone deeper into those topics. That was probably my biggest disappointment, and I think had it really dug into some of those issues, we would have had a much more powerful book. But all in all, it's okay. It's not something that I'm raving about. It's not something that I would insist you go out and read right this minute. It is something that I would say if you ordered from Book of the Month or Jenna's Book Club, that, you know, it's still worth reading. It's not so bad that I would like completely skip it. If you're gonna get it on audiobook or ebook from your local library, you know, something like that, I would recommend. I don't know that I would go rush out and purchase it. I think this is gonna be a book that a lot of people are gonna kind of find right in the middle. I don't think that the feedback that I've been seeing nor my experience indicates that it's going to have a lot of high reviews or a lot of low reviews. I think it's just going to be solidly somewhere in the middle. So that's the end of this video. I hope you liked the review. If you did, hit the thumbs up, comment down below, and let me know what's your favorite type of dystopia. Do you like a climate change crisis? Do you like a post-nuclear situation? Do you like a dictatorship that takes over and just changes the world? Do you like, you know, an artificial intelligence resurgence that like subjugates humans? What kind of dystopian fic are you into? I personally love them all, but I'm always interested to hear what people think about this. And if you're not already subscribed to this channel, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button down below, as well as the notification bell so that you never miss my videos. And that way we can see each other again soon. Thanks so much for joining. Bye.